Well, Uncle Dan,
Hello.
stand-up comedians have this saying where you end on a high note, and once your audience is the most happy and the most boisterous and having the best time, you walk away.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Bring it home. You got to bring it home. Go big.
We at the How to Heretic do not subscribe to that particular axiom.
Yeah, we've learned the opposite lesson.
We reject all precepts of comedy, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we're gonna bring it home one more time with well, Uncle Mark, why don't you tell us?
So this isn't it. At least this was a long time ago, so that helps. So I don't know if you guys caught any of the impeachment trial in the Senate this week, and we talked about it a little bit in the patrons only. So if you want to hear it, go to become a patron. But there were some real ups and downs, and some very fine, very professional arguments on both sides. I'm just kidding. The Democratic House managers presented a devastating case and left no room for the defense to operate. And the bus bench slip and fall lawyer, it is literally true that the guy who gave the closing argument is a slip and fall lawyer of the clown show defense, blamed Madonna and Johnny Depp for the Christian nationalist attack and said Trump is a man of peace. And they really said this: his rhetoric is often too nuanced for his own good. So, now by the time this airs, you will know that Mr. Trump has been acquitted of all charges, of course, because this was him shooting someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
Anyway, the wrecking ball of a lead manager, Jamie Raskin, quoted both Thomas Paine and Voltaire, two giants of the Enlightenment, of Enlightenment thinking, and while they weren't exactly atheists, as the 18th century, in the 18th century they were deists. They were kind of the atheists of their time, right? So I thought that was interesting that he particularly chose those two people. He, of course, cited one of Voltaire's best-known quotes, and that is, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities," in reference to Trump's big lie, leading to the Cracker Barrel terror attack on the Capitol. But here I want to cite another Voltaire quote I found in doing my research for this week's segment, and I quote, "Goa is sadly famous for its Inquisition. Equally contrary to humanity and commerce, the Portuguese monks made us believe that the people worshiped the devil, and it was they who served him." So that's right. This week, we're going to climb into the big old Catholic Wayback Machine of horror and genocide and talk about the Goa Inquisition. Have you guys heard about this little 16th century garden party on the Indian coast before?
I have not.
I mean, I've heard of Goa, and I've heard of Inquisitions.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of both. So we've all heard of the Inquisition broadly, whether or not we expected it. And while the Spanish Inquisition is generally the most well-known, it is neither the first nor the only of Catholicism's famous game of how many shattered bones will it take to get you to a yes on the whole Jesus thing. The Holy Inquisition was a Vatican office and a system of, quote, inquiry and justice aimed primarily at making sure Catholics stayed Catholic and, at minimum, 100% Catholic in only the most orthodox of all possible ways. Any deviation from the bare minimum of total compliance with papal orthodoxy could lead to a rather unpleasant series of events for the accused heretic, including humiliation, torture, and death by a number of different methods, most famously being burned alive in front of your whole community after prolonged torture. Now, we covered one horrible little corner of the French Inquisition when we discussed Father Urban Grandier and his incineration in episode 151. And indeed, the first of many inquisitions began in France in the mid-12th century. And in fact, the office of the Inquisition still exists, rebranded as the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, very recently overseen by self-dethroning Pope Natsicus Benedict of Palpatine, and was instrumental in gathering and destroying as much evidence as of possible child rape in the Vatican's international child rape cover-up operation. So this delightful institution has been with us for 800 fucking years, guys. Happy birthday to you, dear Inquisition. But be warned, when you lean in to blow out the candles, they are really, really gnarly. Lots of black smoke.
Yeah.
Now, the most famous of the Inquisitions, the Spanish-speaking one, took off under the reign of Ferdinand and Isabella and resulted in their total expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. That was a big year for Catholic Spain, you may be aware. Many tens of thousands of whom fled to the more tolerant Portugal for safety. But sadly, just a few years later, the madness and bloodlust of the Inquisition spread to Portugal as well, and the king there decided to force those Jewish refugees to convert to Catholicism. That was hard for me to say forcibly. These new converts were called crypto-Jews or new Christians. That's going to be very important in this conversation. Both of them were pejoratives. Quick aside, many Jews fled Spain and ended up in Morocco, where they were welcomed by the Muslim king and lived in peace for centuries. And one of the most magical days of my life included a very surprise visit to the amazing Jewish cemetery in Marrakesh. You remember that, Doug?
I do.
That was quite a day. When I was suddenly informed by our tour guide that I was from Israel, so only speak Hebrew, and I was like, the what?
Yeah, exactly.
And in we went.
Wow.
So the very next year, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama found his way around the southern tip of Africa all the way to the impossibly beautiful west coast of India, therefore finding the long-sought-after water route to the subcontinent, making the long and dangerous transport of goods via the overland Silk Road obsolete for Europe. He returned home with goods and spices worth 16 times the cost of the voyage. And as you can imagine, the Spanish court was thrilled. So in a few short years, the Portuguese had established their colony around the port city of Goa. And before long, they controlled more than half of the coastline of India through violence and some alliances and alliances of convenience with warring Muslim and Hindu kingdoms on the continent. Many of Portugal's new Christians, remember the forcibly converted Jews, saw this new, very distant colony as a place not only for some commercial opportunities, but a much safer place for them, far from the torture chambers of the Inquisition and the king's spies. So a significant amount made the long journey all the way to Goa in the hope of a better life.
Wow.
And for a while it was. There were actually, I had no idea about this, there were actually long-established Jewish communities in India from as far back as perhaps the 6th century BCE.
Wow.
But for sure, since 70 CE, that the various Hindu kingdoms had not only tolerated, but allowed them pretty much total freedom to practice their faith unmolested. So the Portuguese new Christian arrivals found India not only bursting with opportunity, it was multicultural, multilingual, and tolerant of their faith, whether that be Judaism or Catholicism. Despite the obvious crime of colonization, most of the locals were eager to trade and cash in, right?
Sure.
Stuff went both ways and lots of money. So they had a few relatively blissful decades in their new home, actually. Well, any Jew should know that bliss is not a permanent state of being. In 1542, the saintly Francis Xavier, co-founder of the Society of Jesus, commonly known as the Jesuits, who somehow have inflated themselves to the good guys in the broader Catholic story, which is insane. He arrived in Goa, looked around, and decided that these so-called new Christians, despite now being outwardly Catholic for generations, were not up to his snuff of fanatical devotion to Rome and her church. So he set in motion the mechanism that would become the Goa Inquisition. But randomly, he died before the King of Portugal approved the request, so history wants to spare him the direct blame for what transpired, so he was acquitted of incitement to Inquisition, I suppose.
Yeah.
So the Inquisition set up shop in Goa in 1560 and set about convincing the new Christians whose grandparents and great-grandparents were the original Portuguese immigrants that they were still too Jewy. In truth, some of them were practicing Judaism in secret, both in and outside the Goa colony, but some were now as Catholic as the Pope, but damned by their lineage. Now, in Goa, the Goa Inquisition lasted just 252 short years, and when it was disbanded by royal decree in 1812, the Jesuits who had been conducting it had the foresight to destroy all the records they could find, a Catholic sacrament that maintains to this day when evidence of wrongdoing could be costly. So it's hard to know the actual numbers here, but many of the new Christians were brutally tortured and imprisoned, where many died because they were unable to appear Catholic enough for the magistrates of the Inquisition. Remember, in all the Inquisitions in the world, France, Spain, Portugal, Peru, Mexico, Africa, and here in India, the accused was presumed guilty upon accusation.
Right.
And the burden of proof was entirely on them to prove their innocence, which is the direct opposite of any modern concept of justice, right?
Right.
And the only way they believed the truth could be arrived at was via torture and terror as a matter of course.
Which is the same as all modern.
It is just like modern justice, sadly. In fact, the Latin inscription on the very spooky coat of arms of the Spanish Inquisition reads, Exurge Domine et judica causam tuam, which in English is rise up and plead your case. That
Really?
That gives me the fucking chills. Before long, the Inquisitors were running out of new Christians to terrorize. So they cast their eyes about one of the most diverse places on earth at the time, saw Hindus, Muslims, Jains, and even Buddhists in need of the salvific agony of Jesus' love. So while they had their missionaries forcibly converting all non-Christians in the territory to Catholicism, creating loads more, you guessed it, new Christians, they also had mobs of priests and soldiers destroying nearly 800 Hindu temples and shrines in Goa until they satisfied themselves that there wasn't one left standing in the whole territory.
Jesus.
And then laws meant to break the Hindu religion and culture were instated. Hindus could not hold any public office. They could not give testimony. They could not celebrate Hindu marriages or funeral rites. And a Hindu child whose father died was considered an orphan, regardless of whether their mother and extended family were alive or not.
Oh, my God.
And the church would inherit 100% of the deceased father's property. So remember, this was a very prosperous port town long before the Portuguese got there. So there was a lot of money in Goa, right? You know how police departments have the insane right to seize all the property belonging to a suspect when they kick in the door, even if it's the wrong house? That's what this was. Just officials seizing property pretty much at will. Before long, the Inquisitors had recreated themselves as a princely class in Goa, living in the finest houses of the newly orphaned merchant class, spending wildly and making merry with local women. But hey, if you take the profit motive out of theocratic terrorism, what's even the point? and as the converted Hindus and other forced converts were despised and untrustworthy as new Christians, they were even more in the sights of the loving Jesus' judicial torturers than they were as Hindus. If you think the game was rigged, you would be correct. There was no way to win the Goa Inquisition game. And as I remember, and remember that it wasn't just the poor Hindus, it was also Indian Buddhists, etc., that were invited upon pain of torture and death to be new Christians and subject to terror and harassment. The Portuguese Navy had sacked much of the region over the years. I talked about how they controlled most of the coastline of India. and they had seized an extremely sacred object from a temple in Sri Lanka, believed by Buddhists to be the actual tooth of Buddha. This was an outrage.
Buddhists did relics. That's interesting.
Yeah, apparently there are some relics. This was an outrage to Buddhists all over Asia, and a local king offered a fucking fortune to buy it back from the Catholic authorities in Goa. The Portuguese called it the monkey's tooth or the ape's tooth, in accordance with the racist slur that they used for Asians generally. And the padres of the Inquisition called it a genuine satanic source of evil that had to be destroyed. So the king's ransom was refused, and a huge public show was made of destroying it in Goa. Now, that there was this huge batch of trembling and terrified new Christians, the game really was afoot. The greatest sin to the Inquisition was not failing to be Catholic in the first place, like just being a Hindu, but rather heresy, meaning being a Catholic by force or by choice, but having practices and beliefs, or even being suspected of such, outside their rigid orthodoxy. That's why New Christian was interchangeable with the term crypto-Judaic or crypto-Hindu. You were always suspect of pining for the old ways.
Huh.
And how could one find themselves branded a heretic and therefore guilty in the eyes of the Inquisition in that very moment? Well, your friends, neighbors, and even family members were heavily incentivized to brand you as such. The Inquisition and the accuser would split the accused property 50-50. So you have an enemy, someone stole your girl, some guy undercut your business or just looked at you askance, want to see him tortured and get half his shit? One call, that's all. We're the Inquisition, and we can get you a handsome settlement sooner than you think. How could that system possibly go wrong? The most common local language in Goa is called Konkani, and it was banned on pain of torture. All literature and art of non-Portuguese or non-Catholic origin was burned. The Goa Inquisition was evil as fuck. And again, because the wily Jesuits tried to destroy almost all evidence of it ever having happened, the true scope of this crime against humanity is hard to quantify. But weirdly, historians' best guess say that only 57 people in this 252 years died at the stake, with another 64 people who had died in prison awaiting their fate, had their remains burned in their coffins, with an effigy of them burning above the coffin at the same time.
Good Lord.
Because Catholicism is both ruthlessly diabolical and incredibly silly. Please see our episode on the Cadaver Synod in episode number 59 for that. But at least 16,000 and as many as twice that number of people were accused, imprisoned, tortured, and lost everything they ever had in what amounted to a smash-and-grab robbery by the Jesuit fathers looking to materially improve their lot in life. As Catholic Inquisitions go, the report card for the Goa Inquisition's body count is pathetic. So bad I doubt the Pope even put it on the fridge. Just the fabled Spanish Inquisition likely killed at least 30,000 people in its tenure, torturing and terrorizing no less than 250,000 more. But the Goan Inquisition seems very much more about using the authority of the Church to enable economic colonialism, less via straight-up homicide, and more through the annihilation of a culture, language, and religion to keep the silk and the spice flowing. And if the God-anointed torturers got their beaks wet in the process, what's the harm, right? So that's the Goa Inquisition. It was not the worst, but certainly wasn't anything to write home about. And
well, is there a best Inquisition? I mean, obviously there can be a worst one.
Well, if it's all about the stats, then I would imagine the Spanish one or the Lima Inquisition in Peru probably were the ghastliest. But what's really crazy too is that India, as everybody knows, gained independence from England in 1947, but it took until 1961 for them to kick the Portuguese out of Goa.
Really?
Yeah, and the Indian army literally had to attack it to get them the fuck out. So
well, it's very nice there. I can totally understand that.
It's beautiful. Like, I've never been, but have you been to Goa, Dan?
No, I've been. That's one of the few places that I didn't go. It's like the touristiest place because it is apparently so. It's just beautiful. Lots of beaches. And stuff.
The pictures are beautiful. Big green hills, very lush, beautiful beaches, but. Yeah, no place for a new Christian in those years. So that's the Goa Inquisition, guys.
Well, you were right. At least it happened a long time ago.
Yeah, the upside is it's a long time ago. So let's get out of here. Oof.